If you get out of this car right now, they will follow you instead. The words hit Lily Brooks before she even understood how she had ended up there, sitting in the passenger seat of a sleek black luxury car that smelled like leather and something expensive she could not name. Her fingers still frozen mid-gesture from pointing down the street just seconds ago, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the rain tapping against the windshield. Because only a moment earlier, she had been standing on a cracked sidewalk outside a corner coffee shop on 7th Avenue, simply helping a stranger find his way, and now that stranger was gripping the steering wheel with tense precision. His eyes locked on the rearview mirror as a dark sport utility vehicle turned the same corner they had just passed, headlights cutting through the drizzle like something out of a movie she never asked to be in. And when she tried to reach for the door handle, his voice came again, lower this time, sharper, "Do not open that door." And something in the way he said it made her stop. Not because she trusted him, but because deep down she felt that stepping out might be worse than staying in. And the car surged forward, engine humming as they slipped into traffic, leaving behind the quiet street where everything had still made sense just seconds ago, leaving behind the version of her life that did not include fear or mystery or a stranger who clearly was not just lost. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Lily swallowed hard, her breath uneven as she glanced sideways at the man who had pulled her into this chaos, trying to make sense of him through the blur of adrenaline. He did not look dangerous in the way she imagined dangerous men should. No rough edges, no raised voice, just calm control and a tailored coat that probably cost more than her rent for 3 months. His dark hair slightly damp from the rain, his jaw tight as he checked the mirror again. And for a brief second their eyes met. And she saw something unexpected there. Not anger, not panic, but calculation like every move he made had already been decided 10 steps ahead. And that only made her more uneasy, because people like that did not just wander into neighborhoods like hers asking for directions. People like that lived in a different world entirely, one she had only ever seen through glass windows and passing buses. And yet somehow, through one simple act of kindness, she had crossed into it, without permission, without warning, and now there was no clear way back. The city lights stretching ahead of them, reflections dancing across the windshield, as the black vehicle behind them stayed just close enough to make her chest tighten, and Lily realized with a slow, sinking certainty that this was no longer about giving directions. This was something else entirely, something bigger, something she did not understand yet. And the man beside her, the stranger who had turned her night upside down in the span of seconds, was at the center of it all. The rain grew heavier as the city blurred past them, streaks of white and red lights sliding across the windshield while the black sport utility vehicle behind them stayed just close enough to feel intentional, not random, not coincidence. And Lily pressed her hands against her knees to stop them from shaking as she finally found her voice, low but sharp with fear. "Who are they?" she asked, her eyes locked on the mirror the same way as were. Because at this point, she did not need an explanation for everything. She just needed something that made sense, something that told her she had not stepped into the wrong story entirely. But the man beside her did not answer right away, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel as he switched lanes with smooth precision, cutting between 2 cars as if he knew exactly how much space he had, like he had done this before, like this was not new to him. And that realization sent a chill deeper than the rain into Lily's chest. Because normal people did not move like this. Normal people did not stay this calm while being followed through downtown streets at night. And when he finally spoke, his voice was steady, controlled, almost too calm for the situation. "They are not after you," he said, glancing at her briefly before returning his focus to the road. "But they will not hesitate to use you if you step out right now." And that was the moment Lily understood that whatever was happening, she was already part of it whether she liked it or not. Her throat tightening as she leaned back against the seat, trying to think, trying to breathe, trying to figure out how a simple act of giving directions had turned into this. And outside the car the city continued moving as if nothing was wrong. Pedestrians under umbrellas, taxis honking, neon signs glowing in the wet night. A normal world that now felt impossibly far away from. The one she was trapped in, and suddenly the man reached toward the center console and pressed a button, and the engine responded with a deeper, sharper hum as the car surged forward with more power, weaving through traffic with controlled urgency, not reckless, but fast enough that Lily felt her pulse climb with every turn, every lane change, every second that stretched longer than it should, and she glanced back again, her breath catching when she saw the headlights, still there, still, following, not losing distance, not backing off, just steady, patient like they were waiting for the right moment, and Lily shook her head slightly, more to herself than to him. "This is insane," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay composed. "I was just trying to help you." And something about that made him exhale quietly, almost like a bitter acknowledgement. "I know," he said softer now, and for the first time, there was something human in his tone. Something that did not sound like control or calculation. "And that is exactly why you are in this car." And those words landed heavier than anything else he had said so far, because they did not just explain the situation. They confirmed it. Her kindness had not saved her from trouble. It had placed her directly in the middle of it. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence filled only by the sound of rain and the low growl of the engine as the car turned sharply onto a narrower street lined with older buildings and dim street lights. And Lily's eyes darted around, trying to memorize something, anything in case she needed it later, but everything looked unfamiliar, distorted by motion and fear. And then suddenly he slowed, just enough to take another turn, and she felt the shift in momentum, the slight easing of speed that made her stomach drop, because part of her had started to believe that as long as they kept moving fast, they might stay ahead, but slowing down meant vulnerability, meant risk, meant the possibility that whatever was behind them could finally catch up, and she turned to him again, this time more urgent, more desperate. "You need to tell me what is going on," she said, her voice stronger now, pushed by adrenaline instead of fear, and this time he did not avoid her gaze, his eyes meeting hers fully for a brief but intense second, and in that moment she saw it clearly, not just control, not just intelligence, but pressure, the kind that came from carrying something heavy for too long, something dangerous enough to follow him into the night. And he nodded once, as if deciding something, as if crossing a line he had been holding. "All right," he said quietly, "but you need to listen carefully." And the way he said it made Lily sit straighter without thinking, her fear sharpening into focus as the car rolled forward into the next block, the city stretching endlessly around them. And whatever truth he was about to reveal felt like it would change everything she thought she understood about this night, about him, and about the moment she chose to stop and help a stranger. The car slowed just enough to blend into a quieter street, the kind where the city noise softened into a distant hum. And for the first time since everything began, Lily noticed the sound of her own breathing, uneven and shallow, like she had been running without moving. And beside her the man kept his eyes forward, his posture still composed, but no longer distant, as if he had made a decision he could not undo. And when he finally spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Lily instinctively listen. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said, each word deliberate, leaving no room for misunderstanding. And Lily blinked, the name stirring something faint in her memory, something she had seen on screens or headlines she usually scrolled past without a second thought. But before she could place it, he continued, "I run a company that most people only hear about when something goes wrong." And there was a trace of dry humor in his tone, but it did not reach his eyes. And tonight, something did, and Lily turned slightly toward him, her fear still present, but now mixed with a growing curiosity she could not suppress. Because whatever was happening was no longer just about danger. It was about understanding why she was in it at all. "What kind of company?" she asked quietly, her voice steadier now. And Adrian exhaled slowly, as if choosing how much to reveal. "Technology, security, infrastructure," he said, "the kind of work that attracts attention from people who would rather not be seen." And Lily felt a chill at the implication, her mind racing to connect the dots, the black vehicle, the urgency, the way he drove like someone trained to anticipate threats. And suddenly the situation shifted in her mind. Not random, not chaotic, but targeted, intentional. And that made it both clearer and more frightening, because it meant this was not going to end quickly. So they're following you, she said, more statement than question. And Adrian gave a small nod, his gaze flicking to the mirror again before returning to the road. They had been trying to get close for weeks, he admitted. Tonight they got closer than I expected. And Lily swallowed, her hands tightening slightly against the seat. And me, she asked, her voice quieter now. Why am I here? And Adrian hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough for her notice. And when he answered, his tone softened again. Because you were the only person who stopped, he said simply. And when they saw that, you became part of the equation. And those words settled heavily between them. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just matter of fact. And somehow that made them more real, more unsettling, because there was no escaping the logic of it. Her kindness had made her visible, and in a world she did not understand, being visible was dangerous. And Lily leaned back slowly, absorbing that truth, her thoughts racing through every possible outcome, every possible mistake. And yet beneath the fear there was something else beginning to surface, something quieter, more instinctive, the same part of her that had made her stop in the first place. And she glanced at him again, really looked at him this time, not just the expensive coat or the controlled demeanor, but the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers adjusted. Slightly on the steering wheel, the way his eyes never stayed in one place for too long, always scanning, always aware, and for the first time she realized that whatever power or wealth he had, it had not made him untouchable, it had made him a target. And that changed something in her perspective, shifted the balance from fear alone to something more complicated, something that felt dangerously close to empathy. So what happens now? She asked, her voice quieter but no longer trembling, and Adrian did not answer immediately, his silence stretching just long enough to make her wonder if he even had an answer. But then he turned the wheel again, guiding the car onto a darker stretch of road lined with tall buildings that blocked most of the streetlights. And finally he spoke, his tone firm, resolved. Now we make sure they lose us, he said. And as the car picked up speed once more, the city unfolding ahead of them like a maze of light and shadow, Lily felt a shift inside herself. A realization she could not ignore. She was no longer just trying to get out of the situation. She was in it fully, and whatever came next, she would have to face it not as a bystander, but as someone who had already crossed the line simply by choosing to help. The car moved deeper into the darker part of the city, where the streetlights thinned and the buildings rose taller, casting long shadows that swallowed the road ahead. And for a few moments neither of them spoke, the silence settling between them like a fragile truce, until Lily shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes scanning the streets outside before returning to Adrian, her voice quieter now, but steadier than before. You said they have been following you for weeks, she began, choosing her words carefully. Why not go to the police? And Adrian let out a slow breath, not dismissive, not irritated, but tired in a way that felt older than the night itself. Because the kind of people who follow me do not leave clean footprints, he replied, his tone measured. And the moment this becomes official, it escalates into something much harder to control. And Lily frowned slightly, trying to understand the world he was describing, a world where help was not always safe and where power did not guarantee protection. And she folded her arms loosely, more to ground herself than anything else. So you just keep running, she said. And Adrian shook his head once, his eyes still fixed on the road. No, he answered, I keep moving until I decide where the fight happens. And there was something in that sentence that made Lily glance at him again, something that hinted at a side of him she had not fully seen yet. Not just a man avoiding danger, but someone who was used to facing it on his own terms. And for a brief moment, she wondered what kind of life led to that kind of mindset. What kind of experiences shaped someone into a person who treated threats like calculated problems instead of fear? And without realizing it, she asked, were you always like this? Her voice softer now, more curious than afraid, and Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, the question catching him off guard in a way nothing else had so far. And for a few seconds he did not respond, the only sound the steady rhythm of rain against the glass and the distant hum of tires on wet pavement. And then he spoke. Not looking at her this time, his voice lower, stripped of some of its earlier control. No, he said simply, and that single word carried more weight than a longer explanation ever could. And Lily did not press him, sensing that whatever he had chosen not to say mattered more than what he had revealed. And instead, she turned her attention back to the road, watching the reflections of passing lights ripple across the windshield, her mind slowly piecing together the fragments of the night. The moment she stopped to help, the urgency in his voice, the car behind them, the quiet confidence in the way he handled everything, and somewhere in that chain of thoughts, her fear began to shift again, not disappearing, but changing shape, becoming something she could hold on to without letting it take over completely. And then, almost without thinking, she spoke again. "Take the next left," she said, pointing ahead, her tone instinctive, grounded in familiarity. "There's a service road that cuts behind the old warehouse district. Most people do not use it at night." And Adrian glanced at her briefly, a flicker of surprise crossing his expression. "You know this area well," he observed, and Lily gave a small nod, her lips pressing together in a faint, almost self-conscious smile. "I work nearby," she replied, "and I've had to find shortcuts more times than I can count." And there was a quiet honesty in her voice that contrasted sharply with the tension around them. And Adrian followed her direction without hesitation, turning the wheel as instructed, the car slipping onto a narrower road that immediately felt more isolated, the city noise fading even further as they moved between rows of aging buildings and empty loading docks. And for the first time since the chase began, the headlights behind them did not follow, the black sport utility vehicle continuing straight while they disappeared into the side road. And Lily leaned forward slightly, watching the mirror, her breath catching as the distance between them and the threat finally began to grow. And she let out a small, disbelieving exhale. "I think we lost them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And Adrian did not respond right away, his eyes still scanning, still alert. But after a few seconds, his shoulders eased just enough to signal that he agreed, and he slowed the car to a more normal pace, the urgency fading into something quieter, something more controlled. And a shift in speed made the moment feel almost unreal, like the storm had passed as suddenly as it had arrived, and Lily sank back in her seat, her body finally beginning to release the tension it had been holding. And she let out a breath she did not realize she had been keeping, her gaze drifting toward him once more. And this time, there was something different in her expression. Not just fear, not just confusion, but a growing awareness that she had not just survived something unexpected, she had contributed to it. She had helped, and Adrian seemed to recognize that too, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to the road. And he gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to carry meaning. "That was a good call," he said, and the simplicity of the acknowledgement landed deeper than she expected, because in a night that had stripped away her sense of control, it gave a small piece of it back. And as the car continued down the quiet road, the tension between them shifted once more, no longer just strangers caught in danger, but two people who had, in a matter of minutes, begun to rely on each other in ways neither of them had planned. The quiet of the service road should have felt like relief, but instead it carried a different kind of tension, one that lingered just beneath the surface, like the danger had not disappeared but simply stepped out of sight. And Lily shifted in her seat, her eyes still flicking to the side mirror out of instinct, even though the empty stretch of road behind them showed nothing but darkness and rain. And for a moment she allowed herself to believe it was over, that whatever had been chasing them had lost interest, had moved on, had decided they were no longer worth the effort. But that fragile sense of safety shattered the second a sharp beam of light cut across the intersection ahead, and another vehicle rolled slowly into view from the opposite side, its headlights bright and deliberate as it stopped just long enough to block the narrow road in front of them. And Lily felt her stomach drop as Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel again, his posture shifting instantly from controlled calm to focused alertness, the brief calm gone as quickly as it had come. And without saying a word, he eased his foot off the accelerator, the car slowing as he assessed the situation, his eyes scanning every detail, the angle of the vehicle ahead, the distance to the nearest exit, the timing, the options, all of it happening in a matter of seconds. and Lily leaned forward slightly, her breath catching as she realized what this meant. "That is not random," she said, her voice low but urgent, and Adrian gave a small nod. His jaw set. "No," he replied quietly, "it is not." And for a heartbeat the world seemed to hold still, the rain falling steadily, the engine humming softly beneath them, the headlights ahead unmoving like a silent warning. And then Lily's mind began to race, faster than the fear, faster than the instinct to freeze, because something inside her refused to go back to being helpless, refused to sit still and wait for whatever came next. And she looked quickly to the side, scanning the buildings that lined the road, old warehouses, loading docks, narrow alleys barely wide enough for a car. And then she saw it, a thin gap between two structures, half hidden in shadow, easy to miss unless you knew to look for it. And she pointed sharply, her voice cutting through the tension. "There," she said, "to the right, that alley leads back to the main avenue. But it is tight," and Adrian followed her gesture instantly, his eyes locking onto the narrow passage, calculating the space, the angle, the risk. And for a split second Lily wondered if it was even possible, if the car could make it through without scraping against the walls. But then he made his decision, his foot pressing down as the engine responded with a low surge of power, and the car veered sharply to the right, tires gripping the wet pavement as they slipped into the narrow alley, just as the vehicle ahead began to move, its headlights shifting too late to block them. And Lily braced herself instinctively as the space closed in around them, brick walls rushing past on either side, close enough that she could almost feel them, the sound of rain echoing differently in the confined space, sharper, louder, and Adrian maneuvered the car with precise control, adjusting the wheel by inches, guiding it through the tight passage with a focus that left no room for hesitation. And for those few seconds, everything narrowed to motion, to survival, to the thin line between escape and collision. And then suddenly the alley opened up, spilling them back onto a wider street where the city lights returned in full, bright, and chaotic and alive. And Adrian accelerated without pause, merging into the flow of traffic as if nothing had happened, as if they were just another car in the night. And Lily turned quickly to look behind them, her heart still racing. But the alley remained empty, no headlights, no pursuit, just darkness swallowing the path they had taken. And she let out a breath that felt like it had been building since the moment they first sped away, her shoulders dropping slightly as the realization settled in. They had escaped again, not by chance, but because they had worked together, because she had seen something he had not, because he had trusted her without question, and that understanding shifted something deeper than fear inside her, something steadier, stronger, and she glanced at him once more, her voice quieter, now but filled with a new kind of certainty. "You would not have made that turn without me," she said, not as a boast, but as a simple truth, and Adrian allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. Barely there, but unmistakable. "No," he admitted, his tone calm, but sincere. "I would not have." And for the first time since the night began, the distance between them felt smaller, not erased, but bridged just enough to matter. And as the car continued forward into the city, the rain beginning to soften against the windshield, Lily realized that whatever the situation was, whatever danger followed him, she was no longer just caught in it. She was part of the reason they were still ahead of it. The rain had softened into a fine mist by the time the city opened up around them again. The streets wider now, brighter, filled with the steady rhythm of late-night traffic that moved without urgency. And for the first time since the chaos began, Adrian eased his grip on the steering wheel just slightly, his shoulders lowering in a way that signaled something had shifted, not completely safe, but no longer in immediate danger. And Lily felt it too. That subtle change in the air, the absence of pressure that had been pressing against her chest since the moment she stepped into the car. And she exhaled slowly, her body finally beginning to catch up with everything it had just gone through, her hands no longer trembling as she rested them in her lap. And for a few moments neither of them spoke, the silence no longer tense, but reflective, like both of them were processing the same realization from different sides. And then Adrian turned the wheel gently, guiding the car toward a quieter, Part of the city where the buildings grew taller and more modern. Glass towers rising above the streets with clean lines and controlled lighting. And Lily's eyes followed the shift in surroundings. The transition from worn streets and hidden alleys to polished avenues and guarded entrances. And she felt that familiar sense of distance again, the invisible line between the world she knew and the one he belonged to. And it became unmistakably clear when the car slowed in front of a private driveway marked by a discreet but unmistakable security gate, the kind that did not need signs or guards in plain sight to signal authority. And without saying a word, Adrian reached toward the console and pressed a small panel. And within seconds the gate began to slide open smoothly, as if it had been expecting them, as if his arrival had already been confirmed before they even turned onto the street. And Lily watched in silence as the car rolled forward, passing through the entrance into a space that felt entirely separate from the rest of the city, quieter, cleaner, controlled, in a way she had never experienced before. And the driveway curved gently toward a towering building of glass and steel that reflected the city lights like a mirror. And as they approached the entrance, the doors opened automatically, revealing a lobby that glowed with soft, warm light, the kind that made everything inside look deliberate and untouched by the chaos outside. And Adrian brought the car to a smooth stop beneath the overhang, the engine quieting as the moment settled around them. And for a second, Lily did not move, her eyes taking in the scene, the scale of it, the quiet precision of a place that operated on a level far removed from her daily reality. And then she turned to him slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where you live," she said. Not quite a question, and Adrian gave a small nod, unbothered by the contrast that felt overwhelming to her. "For now," he replied simply. And there was something in the way he said it that suggested even this place, as impressive as it was not permanent, not truly home. And Lily let that sink in, her gaze drifting back to the building before returning to him, her thoughts shifting again, connecting everything she had seen, the car, the control, the people who had followed him, and now this, and the realization settled in with quiet certainty. He was not just someone important, he was someone powerful. And that made everything that had happened feel both more dangerous and more real. And she swallowed, her voice steadier than she expected as she asked, "So what happens to me now?" And for the first time since they met, Adrian hesitated in a way that was not calculated, not strategic, but human, his eyes meeting hers with a flicker of something unguarded, and he leaned back slightly, considering. His answer carefully, "You should not be involved in this," he said finally, his tone firm but not dismissive, "and I will make sure you are safe before anything else." And Lily held his gaze for a moment, searching his expression, trying to decide if those words were reassurance or distance, protection or separation, and she nodded slowly, understanding the logic even if part of her resisted it. Because despite everything, despite the fear and the confusion, something inside her had already shifted, something that made walking away feel more complicated than it should have been. And she reached for the door handle, pausing just for a second before opening it, the cool night air brushing against her face as she stepped out of the car, her feet touching the smooth pavement beneath the soft glow of the building lights. And she stood there for a moment, looking back at him through the open door, aware that whatever had started between them on that rainy street was not something that could simply be undone. And Adrian watched her in silence, the space between them now filled with something unspoken, something that had not existed an hour ago. And as the door closed gently behind her, the night seemed to settle again, quieter now, but no less significant, because both of them knew, even without saying it, that this was not the end of the story. It was only the point where everything began to change. The moment the car door closed, the quiet felt almost unreal, like the world had shifted into something slower, more controlled. But Lily's heart had not caught up yet, still beating with the echo of flashing lights and narrow escapes. And she stood there under the soft glow of the building entrance, her reflection faintly visible in the glass walls behind her, looking like someone who had stepped into a life that did not belong to her. And before she could decide what to do next, the doors opened and two figures approached from inside, both dressed in dark suits, their movements calm but precise, and one of them spoke first, his tone respectful but direct. "Mr. Cole, we have secured the perimeter," and Lily turned slightly, watching Adrian step out of the car, his presence shifting the moment he stood upright, no longer just the man who had driven through rain and danger, but someone else entirely, someone whose authority did not need to be announced. And he nodded once, his expression returning to that composed control she had first noticed. "Any sign of them?" he asked, and the man shook his head. "No, sir, but we are monitoring all access points." And Lily felt a subtle tension return at the exchange, not panic, but awareness. The confirmation that whatever had happened out there was still not over, and Adrian glanced briefly toward her, as if checking that she was still there, still steady, before turning back to the men. "She is with me," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for question, and something about that sentence settled over Lily in a way she did not expect. Not ownership, not control, but protection, clear and immediate, and the men nodded without hesitation, stepping aside as the doors opened wider. And for a brief moment Lily hesitated, her instincts pulling her in two directions, one toward the familiar world she had come from, the other toward the unknown space he was inviting her into. And then she stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the building, the warmth of the interior wrapping around her like a quiet contrast to everything outside, and the lobby stretched before her in clean lines and polished surfaces, the air still and almost silent, as if even sound was managed here. And she became suddenly aware of herself again, of her damp jacket, her worn shoes, the way she must look against the pristine environment. And instinctively she slowed, but Adrian did not, his pace steady, confident, and after a second she followed, drawn forward not just by him, but by the need to understand what this night had turned into. And as they moved deeper into the lobby, another man approached, older this time, his expression sharper, more analytical, and he stopped just short of Adrian, his gaze flicking briefly toward Lily before returning to him. "We need to talk," he said, his tone lower, more urgent. And Adrian gave a small nod, but his response was immediate. "It can wait," he replied, glancing again at Lily. "She is not leaving alone tonight." And the statement hung in the air for a moment, carrying weight that went beyond the words themselves. And Lily felt it, that shift again, the subtle but unmistakable confirmation that her presence mattered now, in a way it had not before. And the older man studied her for a second longer, as if trying to place her in a situation that made no sense before stepping back slightly, conceding without argument. And Adrian gestured toward a set of elevators at the far end of the lobby, and they moved toward them together, the distance between them smaller now, not just physically, but in something less defined, something that had formed in the space between danger and trust. And as the elevator doors opened, with a soft chime, Lily stepped inside beside him, the polished walls reflecting their figures side by side, two people from entirely different worlds brought together by a single moment that neither of them had planned. And as the doors slid closed, sealing them into the quiet ascent, Lily looked at their reflection again, and for the first time since the night began, she allowed herself to fully understand it. The man beside her was not just someone in danger. He was someone powerful enough to command an entire system to move around him, someone whose name carried weight in rooms she would never have entered on her own. And yet despite all of that, he had looked at her on a rain-soaked street and seen something worth trusting, and that realization settled deep, shifting the way she saw him, not just as a stranger who had pulled her into his world, but as someone who had chosen to let her stay in it. And as the elevator rose steadily upward, carrying them further away from the chaos below, Lily knew that whatever came next would not be simple, because nothing about this night had been simple from the moment she decided to stop and help. The elevator rose in near silence, the soft hum of its movement almost soothing after the chaos outside. But Lily could feel the tension returning in a different form, quieter but heavier, like the questions she had been holding back were now pressing forward all at once. And when the doors finally opened onto a private floor that felt more like a residence than an office, she stepped out beside Adrian into a space that seemed impossibly calm, wide windows overlooking the city, warm lighting, everything arranged with careful precision. And for a moment she just stood there, taking it in, the contrast so sharp it almost felt unreal, and Adrian moved ahead a few steps before turning back to her. His expression softer now, less guarded than before, as if the walls around him had lowered slightly now that they were inside, and he gestured toward a seating area near the window. "Sit," he said, not as a command, but as an invitation, and Lily hesitated only briefly before walking over. Her footsteps quiet against the polished floor as she lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, her body still, tense despite the calm surroundings, and Adrian remained standing for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the city outside before returning to her. And when he spoke again, his voice carried a clarity that had been missing before. "You should not go back to your place tonight," he said, and Lily blinked, the words catching her off guard. "What?" she asked, her tone cautious. And he stepped closer, his posture steady, but no longer distant. "If they saw you with me, they will look for you," he explained, "and your home is the first place they will check." And the logic hit her instantly, cold and undeniable, and she felt her chest tighten again, not from immediate danger this time, but from the realization that her life outside this building had already been affected, already changed in a way she could not undo. And she looked down briefly, her thoughts racing through everything she had left behind, her small apartment, her routine, the fragile sense of normalcy she had been holding onto. And when she looked back up, her voice was quieter, more grounded. "So what are you saying?" she asked, and Adrian met her gaze without hesitation. "Stay here," he said simply, and the words hung in the air between them, heavier than anything else he had said so far, because this was not just about safety. It was about proximity, about crossing another line neither of them had planned for. And Lily let out a slow breath, her instinct pulling her back, telling her this was too much, too fast, too far from anything she understood. And yet the memory of the night, the headlights, the narrow escape, the way he had trusted her without question, all of it pushed against that instinct. And she shook her head slightly, more out of disbelief than refusal. "You do not even know me," she said, and Adrian's expression shifted just slightly, something almost like recognition passing through his eyes. "I know enough," he replied, his voice calm but certain. "I know you stopped when no one else did." And that simple statement cut through her hesitation more than any argument could have, because it reminded her of the moment that had started everything, the choice she had made without thinking, without expecting anything in return. And she looked away for a second, absorbing that before speaking again, her tone softer now. "And what happens when this is over?" she asked, when they stopped looking, and Adrian did not answer immediately, his silence stretching just long enough to feel honest. And when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more reflective. "Then you go back to your life," he said, "and this becomes something that happened." And there was no promise in his words, no suggestion of anything beyond that, just a clear boundary drawn between the present and whatever came after. And Lily felt that too. The distance built into the statement, the reminder that whatever this was, it was temporary, defined by circumstance. And she nodded slowly, understanding the reality, even if it left something unsettled inside her. And after a moment she stood, her decision not spoken, but clear in the way she remained where she was instead of walking toward the door. And Adrian seemed to register it immediately, his shoulders easing just slightly as he gave a small nod in return. "There's a guest room," he said, gesturing down a quiet hallway. "You can stay there." And Lily followed his gaze, then looked back at him, and for a brief second their eyes held, the silence between them filled with everything that had happened and everything that had not been said. And as she finally turned to walk toward the hallway, stepping deeper into a space that was not hers, but had become her only safe option, she realized that this was no longer just about getting through the night. It was about what came after, about how a single moment of kindness had pulled her into a world she could not yet understand, and about how leaving it might not be as simple as it once would have been. Morning came slowly, the soft light of early sun filtering through the tall glass windows and stretching across the quiet apartment. But Lily had barely slept, her mind replaying every moment from the night before in fragments that refused to settle: the rain, the headlights, the narrow alley, The way everything had shifted so quickly from ordinary to something she still could not fully process. And when she finally stepped out of the guest room, her movements were cautious, almost hesitant, as if she expected the tension to still be waiting just outside the door. But instead she was met with silence, a calm so complete it felt almost unnatural. And for a brief second she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the danger had passed, that the world outside those walls had returned to normal. But that fragile sense of peace shattered the moment she noticed the television screen mounted on the far wall, already on, the volume low but clear enough to catch the words scrolling across the bottom. And her steps slowed as she turned toward it, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing, because there on the screen was a blurred image of a black luxury car, captured from a distance, headlights reflecting off wet pavement, and beneath it a headline that made her breath catch. Unknown woman seen entering vehicle of tech billionaire Adrian Cole during late-night incident. And for a second she just stood there, frozen, her heart dropping as the reality of it sank in. Not just the words, but the image, the angle, the implication, and suddenly it was not just a private moment anymore. It was something visible, something observed, something already being turned into a story she had no control over. And she stepped closer, her pulse quickening as the footage replayed, showing a vague outline of her figure stepping into the car, the details indistinct but enough to create questions, enough to spark attention, and she felt a wave of disbelief wash over her, followed quickly by something sharper, more personal, because this was not just about him anymore. This was about her. Her face not shown clearly, but her presence undeniable, and she wrapped her arms around herself instinctively, as if trying to hold onto some sense of stability, and behind her she heard the quiet sound of footsteps, and she turned quickly to see Adrian standing near the entrance of the living area, his expression already set, already aware, as if he had expected this before it even happened. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the tension returning in a different form, not immediate danger, but exposure, something harder to outrun. And Lily broke the silence first, her voice tight but controlled. "They know I was with you," she said, not a question, and Adrian nodded once, his gaze shifting briefly to the screen before returning to her. "They know someone was," he corrected, his tone calm but serious, "not who you are." And Lily let out a breath she did not realize she was holding, but it did not bring relief. Not really, because even without a name, the damage had already begun, the story already forming in the public eye. And she shook her head slightly, her thoughts racing. "This is going to follow me," she said quietly, "even if they do not know my name yet." And Adrian stepped closer, his presence steady, grounded. "I will handle it," he said, and there was confidence in his voice, the kind that came from someone used to controlling outcomes. But Lily met his gaze with something different, something firmer. "This is not just yours to handle," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "I am part of it now." And the truth of that statement hung between them, undeniable, and Adrian studied her for a moment, as if reassessing something he thought he understood, and then he gave a small nod, acknowledging it without argument. And for the first time since the night began, Lily felt the shift fully settle inside her, the realization that she could not simply step back into her old life, as if nothing had happened, that the moment she stepped into that car had changed more than just one night. It had changed the direction of everything that came after, and she turned back toward the screen briefly, watching the footage replay once more. The blurred version of herself caught in a moment she barely recognized now. And then she looked back at Adrian, her expression steady despite everything. "Then do not just fix it," she said quietly. "Tell me what we are really dealing with." And the way she said it made it clear she was no longer asking as someone caught in the situation, but as someone choosing to understand it. And Adrian held her gaze for a long second before responding. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a different weight, one that suggested the next truth would not be as simple as the last. "If you want to stay in this," he said slowly, "then you need to know everything." And as the city outside continued its quiet morning, the line between their worlds faded just a little more, replaced by something neither of them could walk away from anymore. The room felt heavier after his words, as if the air itself had shifted into something more serious, more permanent, and Lily held his gaze without stepping back this time, her decision already made even before she fully understood what she was agreeing to, because walking away no longer felt like an option, not after seeing her image on that screen, not after realizing that her life had already been pulled into something far beyond her control, and Adrian seemed to recognize that shift in her. The way her posture straightened slightly, the way her voice had steadied, and he nodded once, not approving or encouraging, just acknowledging the choice she had made, and he moved toward the window, his hands resting lightly against the edge of the glass as he looked out over the city below, as if the explanation he was about to give was tied to everything beyond those walls. And when he spoke again, his voice was calm but stripped of anything unnecessary. 3 weeks ago, one of our internal systems was breached, he said, and Lily listened closely, her focus narrowing, her mind trying to keep up with the weight of what he was saying. Not from the outside, but from within, he continued. Someone inside my company accessed restricted data and attempted to move it without authorization, and Lily felt a quiet chill at that. The idea of something hidden within, something close, and she crossed her arms lightly, grounding herself as she asked, "What kind of data?" And Adrian turned slightly, his expression serious. "Infrastructure mapping, security protocols, city systems," he replied, "the kind of information that in the wrong hands could disrupt more than just one company." And the implications settled heavily between them. Not just corporate risk, but something broader, something that extended into the world outside. And Lily exhaled slowly, her thoughts racing as she began to understand the scale of it. "And the people following you," she said, "they want that." And Adrian gave a small nod. "Or they want leverage to get it," he corrected, "and I have been making it difficult for them." And there was no pride in his tone, just fact, and Lily studied him for a moment, seeing him now not just as a man in danger, but as someone standing in the way of something larger, and that changed the weight of everything she had been through, because it was no longer random, it was connected, purposeful. And she swallowed, her voice quieter now. "So last night," she said, "that was because of this." And Adrian nodded again. "They were testing proximity," he explained, seeing how close they could get, how I would respond. And Lily shook her head slightly, trying to process that level of calculation, that kind of constant pressure. And for a moment she felt something unexpected, not fear, not confusion, but a flicker of understanding, because despite everything, he had not panicked, he had not lost control, he had adapted. And she found herself asking, almost without thinking, "And you deal with this alone?" And Adrian hesitated, just for a second before answering, "Most of the time." And there was something in that answer that lingered, something unspoken that made Lily look at him differently, not just as someone powerful, but as someone isolated by that power. And the realization sat quietly between them before she spoke again, her tone more grounded now, more certain. "Not last night," she said, and Adrian's eyes met hers. And for a brief moment, the weight of everything else seemed to fade, replaced by a simpler truth, one that neither of them had expected but both of them understood. And he gave a small nod, acknowledging it without words. And then the tension returned, not from distance, but from what came next, because knowing the truth did not make things easier. It made them clearer, and Lily took a slow breath, steadying herself before asking the question that had been building since the moment she saw that screen. "So what do we do now?" And Adrian straightened slightly, his posture shifting back into that controlled focus. But there was something different in it now, something that included her instead of excluding her. "We stay ahead," he said, his tone firm, "and we control what they think they know." And Lily frowned slightly, considering that. "How?" she asked, and Adrian's gaze moved briefly toward the television screen before returning to her. "By giving them a story they cannot ignore," he said, and the meaning behind his words settled slowly, deliberately, and Lily felt her pulse quicken again, not from fear this time, but from the realization that whatever came next would not just be about hiding. It would be about stepping forward in a way that changed the narrative entirely. And as she stood there, facing him in the quiet of a morning that no longer felt ordinary. She understood that the moment she chose to stay had already set something in motion, something that would not only define what happened next, but also who she became because of it. The decision was made faster than Lily expected, not with hesitation or drawn-out discussion, but with the same quiet certainty that had defined everything Adrian had done since the night before. And within hours the calm of the apartment shifted into controlled movement, people arriving and leaving with purpose, voices low but focused, screens lighting up with information she could not fully follow. And yet she stood in the middle of it, no longer an outsider looking in, but not entirely part of it either, caught somewhere between the life she knew and the one unfolding around her. And as she watched Adrian move through the space, speaking with his team, giving instructions that were followed without question, she saw the full weight of who he was in a way she had not the night before, not just a man under pressure, but someone who carried responsibility that extended far beyond himself. And when he finally stepped back toward her, the room settling slightly as others moved away, his focus returned fully to her. "We are going to make this public," he said, and Lily felt her breath catch, even though part of her had already expected it. "Public how?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious, and Adrian held her gaze, his expression calm but firm. "A press conference," he replied, "today," and the word landed heavier than anything else because it meant there was no time to ease into this. No space to adjust slowly. It meant stepping directly into the spotlight that had already begun to form around them, and Lily felt the weight of that settle over her, the awareness that once she stepped into that room, there would be no going back to anonymity, no returning to the quiet life she had known before. And she looked down briefly, her thoughts racing through everything she was about to risk, before lifting her gaze again, meeting his eyes with something stronger than doubt. "And what exactly are we telling them?" she asked, and Adrian's expression shifted slightly. Not uncertainty, but careful precision. "The truth," he said, "but not all of it." And Lily frowned slightly, considering that. And he continued, "We tell them you helped me, that you were with me when this happened, and that any attempt to involve you further will be met with full legal action." And the clarity of his plan was undeniable, direct, controlled, designed to shut down speculation before it could grow. And yet Lily felt the edge of something else beneath it, something more personal. "And what about everything else?" she asked quietly, and Adrian's gaze softened just slightly. "Everything else stays with us," he said. And the way he said it made it clear that this was not just strategy, it was trust, and Lily held that for a moment, feeling the weight of it before nodding slowly, accepting what this meant, and the next few hours moved quickly, faster than she could fully process, people guiding her through details, offering clothes that felt unfamiliar but carefully chosen, explaining what to expect, how to stand, where to look, and through all of it she remained grounded by one simple thought. She had chosen to stay, and now she had to follow that choice through to the end. And when the time came, they stood side by side, just outside a large conference room, the sound of voices inside already rising, reporters gathering, cameras preparing, the air thick with anticipation, and Lily felt her heart begin to race again, not from fear of danger this time, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen, in a way she had never experienced before. And she glanced at Adrian, her voice lower now, more personal. "If I do this, there is no going back," she said, and he met her gaze without hesitation. "I know," he replied, and for a moment the world outside that door seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them in that quiet space. And Lily took a slow breath, steadying herself before giving a small nod, her decision clear, and Adrian returned it with the same calm certainty. And then the doors opened, the noise rising instantly as cameras flashed and voices called out, and together they stepped forward into the light, into the story that had already begun to form around them, but now on their terms. And as Lily stood there beside him, facing a room full of strangers who suddenly wanted to know everything about her, she realized that the moment she had given a stranger directions had not just changed her night, it had rewritten the path of her entire life. And there was no turning back now. The room erupted the moment they stepped fully into view. The sharp burst of camera flashes lighting up the space in rapid succession, while voices overlapped from every direction. Questions thrown forward with urgency and expectation. But Adrian did not slow, did not hesitate. His pace steady as he guided Lily to the front, his presence cutting through the noise without raising his voice. And when he finally stopped at the podium, the room seemed to shift, not silent, but focused the energy, narrowing as attention locked onto him, and Lily stood beside him, aware of every movement, every glance, every lens pointed in her direction, her heart beating fast but steady, grounded by the decision she had already made. And Adrian began to speak, his voice calm and clear, carrying across the room without effort. Last night there was an incident involving my vehicle and an unidentified group attempting to follow and approach, he said, and the room quieted further, the reporters leaning in, capturing every word. The woman beside me was not involved in any part of that situation beyond offering assistance when I asked for directions, and Lily felt the weight of his words settle over her. Not just protection, but recognition, a clear line drawn between her actions and the narrative forming around them. And Adrian continued, his tone firm, controlled. She acted with kindness, and because of that, she was placed in a situation she did not ask for and did not deserve. And the words landed differently this time, not just as explanation, but as something deeper, something that shifted the tone of the entire room. And for a moment, the questions paused, replaced by a quiet that carried a different kind of attention. And then Adrian turned slightly toward her, not fully, but enough to include her in a moment. And Lily felt it, the unspoken signal that this was her choice now, her voice if she wanted it. And for a brief second she hesitated, the weight of the room pressing in, but then she stepped forward just slightly, her voice softer than his but steady, clear enough to carry. I did not know who he was, she said, her words simple, direct. I just saw someone who needed help. And a murmur moved through the room, subtle but undeniable. And she continued, her confidence growing with each word. And I would do the same thing again. And that statement shifted something, not just in the room, but in the story itself, because it was no longer about mystery or speculation. It was about choice, about intention, about something human that could not be easily twisted. And Adrian watched her for a moment, something in his expression softening before he turned back to the room, his voice returning to its earlier control. Any attempt to identify or approach her will be considered harassment and will be addressed accordingly, he said. And there was no doubt in his tone, no space for negotiation, and the message was clear, direct, final, and the room responded in the only way it could. More questions, louder now, more urgent. But the tone had changed, the focus shifting from suspicion to curiosity, from rumor to narrative, and Adrian did not answer them all. He did not need to, because the statement had already done what it was meant to do. It had reframed everything. And after a few more controlled responses, he stepped back slightly, signaling the end of the conference, and security moved subtly to guide them away from the front, the noise rising again as the moment dissolved in emotion. But Lily barely registered it. Her focus inward now, processing what had just happened, the way her voice had carried, the way the room had responded, the way something inside her had shifted from uncertainty to clarity in a matter of seconds. And as they moved away from the crowd, back through the controlled space of the building, she glanced at Adrian, her voice quieter now, but filled with something new. You did not just protect me, she said. You gave me a choice. And Adrian looked at her, really looked this time. And for a moment, the noise of everything else faded, leaving just that simple truth between them. And he gave a small nod, his voice low, almost reflective. You made it your own, he replied. And Lily felt that settle deep, because he was right. This was no longer something that had just happened to her. It was something she had stepped into, something she had claimed, and as they continued walking, leaving the echoes of the conference behind them, she realized that the story was no longer being written around her. It was being written with her, and that changed everything. The days that followed the press conference did not return to normal in the way Lily once understood normal, but they did settle into something steadier, something clearer, And for the first time since that rain-soaked night, the uncertainty began to fade into direction, because the story that had once threatened to pull her apart had instead become something that protected her, something that defined her in a way she had chosen, not something forced upon her. And as the media coverage shifted, from speculation to recognition, from blurred images to a clear narrative of kindness and courage, the attention that had once felt overwhelming began to lose its sharp edge, replaced by something quieter, something more respectful. And Adrian had kept his word. Every attempt to dig deeper, to push past the boundary he had set, was handled swiftly and firmly, leaving no space for intrusion. And yet what surprised Lily the most was not how the world responded, but how she did, because somewhere, between that moment on the street and the conference room filled with cameras, she had changed, not into someone different, but into someone more certain of who she already was. And one evening, as the city lights stretched out beyond the windows once again, she stood by the glass, her reflection steady this time, no longer uncertain or out of place, and Adrian joined her quietly, his presence familiar now in a way that still felt unexpected. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence. Comfortable, no longer filled with tension or unanswered questions. And then Lily turned slightly toward him, her voice calm, grounded. "I went back today," she said, and Adrian glanced at her, a small shift of attention. "To your apartment?" he asked, and she nodded, a faint smile touching her expression. It felt smaller, she admitted, but not in a bad way, just different. And Adrian studied her for a moment, understanding what she meant without needing her to explain further, and she continued, "I thought I would want everything to go back to the way it was," she said, "but I do not think that is possible anymore." And there was no regret in her tone, just clarity. And Adrian leaned slightly against the window, his gaze moving out over the city before returning to her. "Change rarely asks permission," he said quietly, and Lily smiled faintly at that, recognizing the truth in it. And after a brief pause, she spoke again, more directly this time. "So what happens now?" she asked, echoing the question she had asked before, but meaning something entirely different now. And Adrian held her gaze, not answering immediately, because this time the answer was not something he could decide alone. And Lily saw that, understood it, and for a moment the weight of everything they had been through seemed to settle into something simpler, something more human. And she took a small step closer, her voice softer now but certain. "I did not stay because I had to," she said. "I stayed because I chose to," and the words carried everything they had built between them, every moment of trust, every decision made under pressure. And Adrian's expression shifted, something unguarded finally breaking through the control he had held on to for so long. And he nodded slowly, acknowledging not just her words, but what they meant, and he stepped closer as well, the distance between them closing in a way that felt natural, not forced. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had ever been, but more honest. "Then stay," he said, not as an offer of protection, not as a solution to a problem, but as something else entirely, something that belonged to both of them. And Lily held his gaze, searching for anything that might suggest hesitation. But there was none, only the same certainty she had come to recognize. And she smiled, not out of relief, but out of understanding. And as the city continued its endless motion beyond the glass, the story that had begun with a simple act of kindness found its ending not in escape or resolution alone, but in connection, in the quiet decision of two people from different worlds choosing to stand side by side, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And in that choice, everything that had once felt uncertain finally became clear.